Right now, somewhere in America, a metal basket drops into hot oil, and about 3 minutes later, a paper carton fills up with French fries. Every one of them looks the same. Same length, same golden color, same crunch. You could buy that exact carton in Ohio or Texas or Alaska and never taste the difference. It might be the most dependable food in the country. Here is the strange part. That fry comes from a plant that started out as the opposite of dependable. It was born on the freezing slopes of the Andes, and it grew in 1,000 different shapes and colors. Fat ones, twisted ones, red ones, purple ones, blue ones, knobby little fingers no factory would ever accept. No two farms grew quite the same mix. So how did a plant that came in 1,000 forms end up as one identical fry? That sounds like a simple food question. And the road to the answer runs somewhere much darker. It runs through the rise of modern Europe, through the smoke of the first industrial cities, and through a graveyard. Because the very thing that turned this crop into a miracle, one reliable plant that could feed almost anybody, is the same thing that helped starve a nation. The potato fed the modern world into existence. Then, it showed that world exactly how much you gamble when everyone leans on the same answer. It all starts on a mountainside where almost nothing else will grow. Go up, higher than farms are supposed to go, 3,500 meters above the sea. Then 4,000, into the thin, cold air of the Andes, where the sun burns your neck in the afternoon and the temperature drops below freezing almost every night. The soil is thin. The growing season is short and mean. Wheat would die up here. Corn would sulk and fail. This is close to the last place on Earth you would expect anyone to build a food supply. People did it anyway, thousands of years ago. And they did it with a plant that kept its harvest underground, out of the wind, sheltered from the frost that wrecked anything standing above it. Picture one of those early farming families at harvest. They tip a basket over, and what rolls out onto the ground looks nothing like your grocery store. There are potatoes the size of a thumb, and potatoes as round as a fist. Red ones, yellow ones, purple straight through the middle. Some so knobby and twisted they look almost angry. Even today, more than 4,000 kinds of native potato grow in those highlands. And one family's field might hold dozens of different varieties, planted together on purpose. The mixing was the whole strategy. Up in the mountains, weather is a gamble. A frost settles into one valley and skips the next. A dry spell wrecks one variety while another shrugs it off. So the farmers spread their bets. They planted many kinds, because in a bad year, the ones that survived would carry the family through. Their safety came from having a lot of different answers to the same hard question. That habit of never betting everything on one plant is the most important thing in this entire story. 300 years later, on the other side of the world, millions of people are going to forget it. Growing the things was only half of what these families figured out. They also learned to store them. They left potatoes out overnight, so the hard mountain frost would freeze them solid. In the daytime, they trampled the water out with their bare feet and let the high sun dry what was left. Do that over and over, and you get chuño, a light, rock-hard potato that keeps for years without rotting. A family could take the bounty of one good harvest and eat through the lean months, through a war, through a season when nothing grew at all. So, by the time anyone in Europe had ever heard of it, the potato was already a finished piece of survival gear. Bred, sorted, tested, and built into a whole way of living. Over a stretch of time, so long it is hard to hold in your head. That bond went deeper than farming. In 2026, scientists at UCLA and the University at Buffalo published a study on the DNA of indigenous people in the Peruvian Andes. They carry the highest known number of a particular gene, the one behind the enzyme in your saliva that starts breaking down starch. The second food hits your mouth. Most people around the world carry about 7 copies of it. Andeans carry around 10. Those extra copies came with slightly better odds of surviving and having children, a little over 1% per generation. And the timing lines up with the centuries when a starch-heavy diet built largely around the potato became the thing they lived on. Their ancestors may have been shaped, quietly, by the crop they were shaping. Then, in the 1500s, Spanish ships appeared on the coast of South America, and this careful arrangement started coming apart. The Spanish took the potato the way they took gold, fast and without really understanding it. Some tubers went down into the holds of ships heading back across the Atlantic. But look at what actually made the crossing. A thin slice of the crop, a few varieties out of thousands, and almost none of the knowledge that had kept it safe. No chuño. No sense of how to spread the risk across many kinds. All of that stayed behind on the mountain. Europe was about to be handed one of the greatest survival foods on the planet, with most of the instructions missing. For a long time after it landed, Europe had no idea what to do with the potato. Some of that was plain snobbery. Here was a plant that grew its food down in the dirt, in the dark, out of sight, while the familiar crops stood up tall in the sun and waved in the wind. Wheat, barley, oats. The potato hid underground like it had something to be ashamed of. It appeared nowhere in the Bible, which carried real weight with people back then, and it belonged to the nightshade family, cousins with a few genuinely poisonous plants. So its reputation was in trouble before anyone took a bite. In a lot of places, for a lot of years, the potato was something you fed to pigs or to the poor and kept off a respectable table. That suspicion is a smaller piece of the story than you might think, and it faded faster in some countries than others. The better question is what finally changed Europe's mind. 2 things did: governments and hunger. Kings and generals looked at this crop and saw something their subjects had not yet noticed. It produced a mountain of calories on a small patch of ground. On land where grain struggled, it sat underground, harder for a passing army to burn or steal than a field of wheat. It needed no mill, no miller, no baker. You dug it up, boiled it, and ate it. For a ruler trying to keep his cities fed and his soldiers standing, that came about as close to magic as farming get. You have probably heard a few famous stories about how Europe got talked into it. In France, a man named Antoine Parmentier supposedly threw fancy dinner parties where every dish was made of potato, and posted guards around a potato field by day, then quietly pulled them off at night, so curious peasants would sneak in and steal a crop they now assumed had to be worth something. Over in Prussia, Frederick the Great is said to have ordered his people to plant potatoes, whether they liked it or not. These tales have been polished by a lot of retelling, so hold them loosely. What was really happening had less to do with one clever trick and more to do with slow, grinding pressure. In the end, the potato won the way it always won best. It outlasted everything else on the table. Year after year, grain harvests failed. Wars trampled the fields flat. Bread went scarce and expensive. And every single time, the families who had planted potatoes were the ones who still had something in the pot. A cautious farmer could turn up his nose at the strange tuber in a good year. In a bad year, that strange tuber stood between his children and an empty stomach, one hard winter at a time. Hunger did the convincing that no nobleman's dinner party ever could. So the potato crept across the map, field by field, country by country, and as it spread, something enormous started happening underneath Europe, so quietly that almost nobody living through it noticed. A continent that had spent its entire history one failed harvest away from starving suddenly had a backup, buried safe in the ground. What that backup did to Europe over the next 2 centuries is the part of this story that gets left out of the cookbooks. It changed how many people the continent could hold. Here is a question nobody in Europe thought to ask at the time. What happens to a country when the poorest people in it finally get enough to eat? Europe was about to find out. And the answer reshaped the continent. Start with a single patch of ground. Plant it with wheat. And in a decent year, it feeds a family for a while. Once somebody has cut it, hold it to a mill, ground it, and baked it into bread. Plant that same patch with potatoes, and it throws off far more calories, often on ground too poor or too wet for grain. And it skips the mill and the baker and the whole chain in between. You dig it up, drop it in a pot of water over the fire, and dinner is ready. A poor family with 1 cow and a small field of potatoes could actually eat their fill, day after day, which for most of European history had been anything but guaranteed. Now put a person on that patch of ground. Somewhere in Europe in the 1700s, a boy is born into a cottage with a dirt floor. Under the old rules, his odds are ugly. The lean months between harvests kill children like him every year, and a bad harvest kills them in bunches. But his family grows potatoes now, so he eats through the winter, and the next one, and the one after that. And he does something his grandfather's brothers never got to do. He grows up. Multiply that boy by a few million and watch what it does to a continent. For most of the past, hunger had kept a hard ceiling over Europe. Bad harvests killed the weak, especially the young, and held the population down. The potato lifted that ceiling. Children who would have died were living long enough to have children of their own. Villages that had held steady for centuries began to swell. And once a village held more people than its fields had work for, the extra sons and daughters started walking toward the towns. Follow that boy again. 20 years on, there is nothing for him at home. So he takes a road out of the village and keeps walking until the sky turns the color of coal smoke. He ends up in a place like Manchester, standing in front of a brick building that roars from the inside. And he goes through the gate and takes a job at a machine that never gets tired. He is one man. Behind him, on that same road, are hundreds of thousands more just like him, arriving exactly when the mills and the shipyards and the mines were desperate for hands. It would be easy to hand the potato too much credit here. Coal did the heavy lifting. So did steam engines, trade routes, banks, and empires. But underneath a lot of that visible machinery sat one plain fact. Europe could suddenly feed far more people than ever before, on the same old land, thanks to a cheap and reliable crop buried safe in the soil. Economists who have run the numbers on that era credit the potato with a real share of the population boom and the rush into the cities. It was one of the hidden engines running under the floorboards of the modern world. And nowhere did that engine run harder than on a rainy green island off the western edge of the continent. In Ireland, the reasons stacked up almost perfectly. The cool, wet weather suited the potato so well that it grew like it had found a second home. But the deeper reason was the way land and power were carved up. Most of the good ground belonged to a small number of landlords, and millions of poor families rented tiny scraps of what was left, paying for it with their grain and their livestock. On a plot that small, wheat could never feed a household, The potato could. Barely. But it could. So for millions of Irish tenants, this crop stopped being a backup. It became the only thing standing between a family and nothing. The one plant that made survival on a patch of rented dirt mathematically possible. Which is a fine arrangement. Right up until the year the potato does not come. By the 1840s, the numbers had gotten frightening, though almost nobody saw them that way yet. Somewhere around 3 million people in Ireland were living on the potato and very little else. A grown man working in the fields might eat 10 or 12 pounds of them a day. Boiled. At every meal. All year long. And most of what they planted was a single variety. A big watery potato called the lumper. Popular because it cropped heavily on bad ground and asked for almost nothing in return. One crop. Mostly one kind of that crop. A whole population standing on top of it. Then, in the late summer of 1845, something new blew in on the wind. It was a disease we now call potato blight, caused by a water mold that scientists later named Phytophthora infestans. A farmer walks out to a field that looked green and healthy a week ago and finds the leaves gone black and slick. He kneels down and digs for the tubers, the part that is supposed to be safe under the soil, and they come up grey and stinking and fall apart in his hands. Not one plant. The whole row. Then the whole field. Then every field he can see from the top of the hill. This is where a choice made 300 years earlier comes back to collect. Think of those farmers high in the Andes, planting dozens of kinds in one plot. Safe, because they always kept many different answers in the ground. Ireland had done the reverse. And not out of stupidity. It had been pushed there, acre by acre, by rent and poverty, and the simple math of a tiny plot. Millions of plants. Nearly all of them the same kind. Packed shoulder to shoulder across an entire island, for a disease that could kill that one kind of potato. A country planted like that was not millions of separate targets. It worked like one target. Copied a million times over. Beat a single plant. And you had already beaten all of them. The blight came back the next year. And the year after that. But blight by itself does not make a famine. Potatoes rotted all over Europe in those same years. In France. In Belgium. In the Netherlands. And those countries buried their dead in the hundreds and the thousands. Ireland buried them in the hundreds of thousands. What happened there came from something else. And this is the part that matters most. Even while the potato was turning to slime in the ground, Ireland was still producing food. Grain still ripened. Cattle still grew fat in the fields. Wagons still rolled to the ports. Some of them with soldiers walking alongside. And ships still pulled out of Irish harbours loaded with meat and corn while people starved a few miles inland. That food belonged to somebody else. It was owed as rent to landlords. And the families raising it owned no land, kept no savings, and had no money to buy it back. Meanwhile, the government in London answered the crisis through the filter of a firm belief that markets should be left alone to sort themselves out. So relief came late, came thin, and came wrapped in rules that kept it away from the people who needed it most. The blight destroyed the crop. The system turned a crop failure into a famine. You do not need the grim details to feel what that looked like. A cold hearth with an empty pot hanging over it. A cottage with its roof pulled in and its door standing open. The family long gone. A thin line of people walking a road toward the coast because there was nothing left behind them worth staying for. Villages that emptied out and never filled again. And in the ground all around them, potatoes still coming up black every season. No longer food. Just rot in the wet dirt. By the time the worst of it passed, Around 1852, roughly 1 million people were dead from hunger and the diseases that come with it. Another million or more had fled, crammed into ships so crowded and so filthy that people started calling them coffin ships. In about 7 years, Ireland lost something close to a quarter of everyone in it, and the country has never gotten back to the size it was before. The ones who made it across carried almost nothing. What they did carry was the memory of what had happened, and a relationship with this crop that no other people on Earth had earned quite the same way. They stepped off the boats in New York and Boston into a country where the potato was already growing in the fields, waiting for them, and where nobody had the slightest idea what it had just done. America was about to take that plant and put it through something no one in Ireland could have imagined. The Irish who came through the 1840s and 50s landed in a country that already had potatoes in the ground. Colonial farmers had grown them for generations. Thomas Jefferson served them at the White House. The plant was old news in America. What America did with it next had nothing to do with famine, and everything to do with the way this country handles any food it decides to love. It scales it up. It smooths it out. It makes the same thing, over and over, forever. What America wanted from the potato was a machine that happened to be a plant. Something you could grow the same, ship the same, cook the same, and sell the same, in every town on the map. And the country spent the next 100 years bending this crop into exactly that shape. It started in the fields, out of the thousands of varieties that exist, and the dozens that had spread through Europe. American growers narrowed down hard onto a small handful. Above all, a big, long, starchy potato called the russet Burbank. It stored well, it shipped well, and it fried up beautifully. So it became the potato behind the fry. Idaho, with its volcanic soil and its cool nights, turned into an empire built on that one variety. Then came the invention that changed how the world eats. The man at the center of it was an Idaho potato baron named J.R. Simplot, who had already gotten rich drying potatoes for American soldiers in the Second World War. His company figured out how to freeze a French fry so it could be shipped anywhere and finished in a basket of hot oil in 3 minutes flat. In 1967, Simplot shook hands with Ray Kroc, the man building McDonald's into a giant. Understand what that handshake fixed. Until then, McDonald's had been peeling and cutting fresh potatoes in the back of every single restaurant, by hand, which meant the fries were never quite the same twice. Some days they came out perfect. Some days they came out grey. And every summer, when the good russets ran short, quality fell off a cliff. Frozen fries solved all of it. Cut once, in one enormous factory, to one exact specification. Then trucked to every store in the chain. By 1972, every fry McDonald's sold in America came out of a freezer. That is the dream this country chased all the way down. A potato bred to a standard, grown to a size, cured in storage to control its sugar so it would brown the right shade, cut to a set length, blanched, frozen, boxed, shipped, and dropped into oil at a temperature a machine decides. The wild, knobby, thousand-faced plant of the Andes had been sanded down into one dependable golden stick. It worked, and that part deserves to be said plainly. This system feeds an enormous number of people, cheaply, in January as easily as in August, at a price almost anyone can pay. Frozen potato products, most of them fries, now account for about half of all the potato an average American gets in a year, close to 60 pounds a person. The fry is how this country eats this crop now. So look at the two ends of the road, side by side. At one end, a field high in the Andes, holding dozens of kinds of potato in a single plot. Lumpy and beautiful and all different. Kept that way on purpose because a family's life depended on never betting everything on one plant. At the other end, a red carton on a tray. Every stick in it identical. Grown from nearly the same plant. In nearly the same soil. Cut to the same length. In every state in the Union. The potato started as 1,000 answers to 1,000 hard problems. The modern world asked it for one answer, repeated forever, and got exactly what it asked for. That answer feeds billions of people. It also has a bill attached. And Ireland already paid it. A plant that survived poison rumors, crossed the Atlantic twice, lifted a continent, and stood at the center of one of the worst catastrophes of the 19th century, is now sitting in a paper carton on somebody's tray, waiting to be eaten without a second thought. So which one would you take? The field of 1,000 potatoes? Or the perfect identical fry? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe. Because almost every ordinary thing on your plate is hiding a story like this one.